Very effective. So, welcome. This is amazing that everybody. This is a joint meeting of the select boards of our 8-member towns that comprise the Berkshire Hills Regional School District and the Southern Berkshire Regional School District. And I am Lucy Prashker. I am the chair of the Regional School District Planning Board. With me is our vice chair, Peter Taylor, and our lead researcher and project manager, Dave Everline, our other members of the Regional School District Planning Board here as well. I'm going to first ask the chairs of the respective select boards to call your meetings to order if you think that appropriate. So beginning with Steve Bannon.
So we'll start with Lee Davis.
Here.
Eric Gabriel.
Here.
Garfield Reed.
Here.
Ben Elliott.
Here.
Steve Bannon, all present.
Great, thank you. Alford, Charlie?
Peggy Wilson, and then
Here.
Charlie Ketchum here, and Peter Pusilowski is not here. So I'll call this meeting in order from Powellville.
Great. Okay, everyone, is George here? George is
Yes.
not here. Are there
Yes, I am,
any
Lucy.
of the board?
I'd like to call the Huron Select Board meeting to order as posted. And George McGurn is here, Lucinda Vermillion is here, and I believe Mary Bracy is here, but I'm not sure. But we do have a quorum.
Great. Patrick from Stockbridge?
As acting chair of the select board, Jamie Knockey.
Here.
Patrick White here, Jeff Riddle could not make it, so we have forum president, and I call him the meeting board.
Great. West Stockbridge?
Hi, I'm Andy Potter, Andy Kraus,
Here.
and I'm Kathleen Kersley, and I'll call the meeting to order for
Thank
Town
you.
West Stockbridge.
Is Justin here from Monterey? There he is.
Frank Abbott.
Here.
Susan Cooper.
Here.
Justin Maycock, President.
Great.
Monterey Select Board, call to order.
Sarah?
Bethany
Here.
Bill West, Carol White, Helen Marlborough, meeting order.
And Renee?
Sheffield did not post a meeting, and Bob Kilmer is the chair.
Okay, thank you. And on behalf of the Regional School District Planning Board, I'm going to call to order subcommittees, of which we have a quorum. That would be project management. So Peter Taylor.
Here.
Nadine. Here. Steve.
Here.
And I'm here. Anyone else from project management here? Yeah, but around the table. Yeah, thank you, Bonnie. Community outreach, we have a quorum. Nadine here, Patrick. I'm here and Peter's here. Anyone else in the room? Community? Tara is here. Okay, and Susan, I think I saw. Okay. And I think that's it. While there are other board members in attendance, there are no others around the table that I see. So I think we're good. So with that housekeeping out of the way, I want to begin by thanking you, really, the select boards and finance committees of our 8 towns for coming together in person this evening to hear our report and recommendation, which is based on the work you asked us to do 4 years ago. And the question you asked us to consider boiled down to its essence is whether our 2 districts can do better together what they now do apart. The statutory language is more colorful. They're supposed to look at the educational and financial advisability of regionalization, but that's the essence of the question. Can we do better together than we are currently doing apart? And of course, the decision whether to merge is going to be made by the voters of the 8 towns at special town meetings later this year. But I think it's really important that we came together tonight because it is really modeling what has motivated our 24-member board over these last 3.5 years and what is at the heart of our recommendation, which is a desire to come together to do what is best collectively for the children of our 8 towns. That's at the heart of it. And you're coming here together tonight models that desire and goal. So thank you.
If the people in the foyer would like to sit, there's a number of chairs on this side. I'm sorry to interrupt.
No problem. Yeah, and if anyone has trouble hearing me, the reason I'm standing is not because I like to stand, but I really didn't want to have my back to any of the people who came tonight. So forgive the formality. As many of you know, we began our work in March of 2020. And we were able to get in just one in-person meeting before the pandemic hit. And that was our organizational meeting. Since then, we've had over 180 open meetings, all by Zoom, during which we have studied, analyzed, and debated the data and reports of our many experts. Our educational research team has been led by Jake Everline. Most of you know Jake, but those who don't, Jake holds a doctorate in education. He has been the superintendent of multiple school systems in Berkshire County, including the public schools in Pittsfield, Lenox, and Lee. And he is an expert on collaboration and regionalization efforts across the county, both those efforts that worked and those efforts that didn't. On Jake's research team were 3 other former superintendents. We also have experts in public school finance, including Matt Abrams, who created the financial models and projections that drove our assessment methodology work. Before we engaged Jake, we had engaged another set of experts, former superintendents who are part of the Massachusetts Association of Regional Schools, known as MARS. And we engaged them to look at our districts at baseline and to project what would happen in both districts if we continued along the current path with no changes to our operational model. Our conclusion, given declining enrollment, and we're going to get to those numbers in a minute, operating costs that keep increasing even though enrollment goes down, and relatively flat state aid, our current model of operation is not sustainable. What does that mean? That means that either taxpayers will have to cover the increasing gap by paying a larger and larger share of school operating costs, or the districts will be forced to cut programs and support for students and teachers. So our next step after we reached that conclusion was to engage Jake's research team to explore and present to us other options. And from the many models considered, the research team recommended the model that is now before us. And that is merging the 2 districts to create a new pre-K through 12 district, preserving all existing elementary and middle schools as they are, and combining the 2 high schools at a newly constructed state-of-the-art building with greatly expanded vocational and technical educational facilities, with that new facility to be built on the Great Barrington campus of Berkshire Hills Regional School District. After deliberating the pros and cons of all of the models that were considered, our board voted in April of 2021, so over 2 years ago, to select the recommended model of our research team for further study and development. And the main questions that we've been digging into over the last 2 years, big high-level questions have been, one, what educational benefits could come from pooling our resources and combining our high schools? Two, what assessment methodologies would be fair and affordable for each of the 8 towns? And three, what would be a fair and workable governance structure for our new district? Jake's going to speak to the first 2 questions. I want to take just a couple of moments to speak to the governance question. So as you know, our 8 towns vary widely in population. My town, Alford, is the smallest, and we have a whopping 486 residents based on 2020 census. The largest town is Great Barrington, and their population is 7,150, was as of the 2020 census. Sheffield is the next largest at about 3,300, and the rest of the towns are south of that. Our board felt strongly that if we were going to join together to form a new region of 8, we should have a governance structure that reflects a single region view, right? Rather than a structure that would be weighted according to relative town size. And where we landed was a school committee of 11 with members elected district-wide, which is the way it works now in both districts. We have district-wide elections, but with residency requirements, as we have now in both districts, that break down as follows. So 3 from Great Barrington, 2 from Sheffield, and 1 from each of the other 6 towns. So while there's a recognition of our 2 largest towns, Great Barrington and Sheffield, in that governance structure, our small towns still have a meaningful voice and a meaningful vote. It is important to note, and I'm sure many of you are thinking this, that the committee would have 6 members resident in the 5 towns of the Southern Berkshire Regional School District, the smaller of the 2 districts, and 5 members resident in the 3 towns that currently comprise the Berkshire Hills Regional School District. And that wasn't lost on us, right? That the smaller of the 2 districts by numbers would actually have 1 additional member than the 3 towns that make up the larger share of the population. But again, that came from our view, especially given that these members are being elected district-wide, that we are going to be operated as a single region. And we're going to start thinking of ourselves as a single region. And this governance structure reflects that view. So where are we now in the process? You probably know that in July, we voted to recommend merger on terms that are laid out in a draft regional agreement, which we have been working on for close to a year. The regional agreement we've been working on for close to a year. While the agreement's language remains subject to review by DESI and legal review, we believe that substantively, the regional agreement is now largely complete and it's posted on our website if you want to take a look at that. Jake has a slide that he's going to show you in a few minutes that lays out our full projected timeline, but assuming we're able to secure DESI sign off next month. We are still targeting putting the question before the voters at special town meetings to be held, we hope, on October 23 or thereabouts. So we're still targeting that date. I think we provided all the select board and finance committee members with materials that summarize the reasons for the board's recommendation. And we've also provided an explanation of the assessment methodologies we have developed for both operating costs and capital costs. And this sheet that shows projected fiscal impact for each of the 8 towns on an individual basis. Before opening the floor for questions and discussion from our board, Jake and I would like to walk you through those materials. And for those on Zoom who would like to follow along, the sheets, the materials are available on the landing page of the website. And you'll see tabs you can click on that website that relate to each of the topics we're going to walk through. So the first document is the fast facts document. You all should have that. It should be the first in your packet. And it includes a summary of why we think the recommended model presents the best path forward for our intent. And again, as you can see in the first bullet, the recommended model that we're talking about here would preserve elementary and middle schools as they are, combine the high schools in a new building that we would design together. The new building would include facilities for 6 CBTE, also sometimes referred to as Chapter 74 programs, which would be triple the current number in South County. And our work showed that our students are sorely underserved in CBTE offerings when you compare what we have to what's offered in other parts of the county, or for that matter, across the Commonwealth. One question we've been asked a lot in terms of this model is whether following the merger, a family could opt to continue to send their children to the school they're currently sending them to, even if that school is not the school that is in closest proximity to where the family lives. And the answer to that is yes. We've got a provision in the regional agreement that ensures that no family would be forced to move their kids out of the elementary or second or middle school that they currently attend. So families with kids in a particular school, when the merger occurs, will be permitted, not required, but permitted to keep their kids in that school, even if that school is not in closest proximity. So Alford is a great example, right? Great Barrington is much closer to Alford than Sheffield for elementary and middle school kids. But if their families in Alford who want to continue to send their kids down to Sheffield for elementary and middle school, they will be permitted to do so. And there will also be additional, what we call intra-district choice, so choice within the district, permitted to the extent seats are available. So quite a bit of flexibility there. The second through fifth bullet in that past fact sheet, Jake is going to cover in more detail. It relates to the fiscal impact and educational benefits, but just in summary, by pooling resources and realizing economies of scale and efficiencies, our projections show that we can save significant money. Savings that could be used to tamp down assessment increases or to invest in educational enhancements. That will be up to the new district school committee. By combining schools, we could provide students and teachers with more opportunities and more support. And a combined district, while still relatively small, we're talking about a district that is fewer than 2,000 students, That's considered a very small district. But by combining, we would offer a more diverse population of students, teachers, and staff, a bigger tent in effect, under which all could feel they belong. Let's look next at enrollment, which should be the next page in your packet. Because compliance and enrollment is foundational to our entire study, the reason this study was done. And you've seen these numbers before. Enrollment declines have been dramatic. And based on demographic data, the declines are projected to continue. Just since the year 2000, there has been a 37% decrease in enrollment. And by the way, these drops have been very close to what was predicted for enrollment declines when people were making predictions. I know some people are very dubious about projections about the future, but in this case, these projections have really held true. We are losing, and some could argue we have already lost, the critical mass necessary to offer the broad array of programming and support necessary to meet the needs of all of our students. By combining, we'd be better able to protect what we currently have, rather than face the prospect of having to reduce or eliminate existing programs because of too few students or too little money. We can optimize class size. We can offer more comprehensive programs, academic programs, services, supports, and enrichment activities. We can expand extracurricular sports clubs and activities, and we can save money through economies of scale. A few words about transportation, which should be the next sheet in your packet. When we first began this work, I thought transportation might be our biggest challenge. I was wrong. According to a couple of different studies, including one that used state-of-the-art routing software, transportation, it turns out, should not be a major concern. Because we are keeping elementary and middle school students where they are, the time spent on the bus by those young kids would either stay the same, or if a family did opt for school in closer proximity than the school their kids are currently going to, it would actually decrease for those young kids, which is a good thing. While some high school students in Sheffield and Marlborough would definitely have longer bus rides, no question about that. Their high school's in Sheffield now, their high school would be in Great Barrington or would emerge. We learned that with a relatively modest investment in some additional vans, maximum time on bus for all students could be reduced from 1 hour, which is what it is currently, to 45 minutes. And most students would have rides shorter than 30 minutes. An added benefit is that elementary school students from the Southern Berkshire towns would no longer have to ride buses with high school students, which they do now. So that's a really good thing. So bottom line here is that transportation should not be a major challenge were we to combine.
Excuse me, when will you be doing questions? Following the?
Yes, following our presentation.
Thank you.
Yes. So now I'm going to turn the floor over to Jake to speak to the educational benefits, fiscal implications, and assessment methodologies.
Thank you. Hi, everybody.
Okay.
My wife just, or my watch just, it says your stress level is unusually high. Wait, though, seriously, stop. So anyway, so I'm here to walk you through a couple things. One is the educational quality statement, the educational value proposition that the board considered. I just want to call out Deb Phillips, who is the chair of the Education Quality Subcommittee. the members of the committee did a lot of work over the last 3 years, exploring a very complicated question, which is what is quality education? How do we measure it? How do we improve it? We developed a document they developed a document that was published at the end that had a series of value propositions organized in particular buckets, which are actually in the handout that you have. But they also set up a series of guiding principles, which are on the screen right now. And I think they're worth sort of calling out. The first is that all students in all 8 towns have equitable access to the broadest range of high quality academic programs, enrichment activities, and targeted services, regardless of where they live. And the idea there is that whether there are things happening in one district or the other, by pooling resources and coming together into a single 8-town district, all those things become accessible to all of children. The second guiding principle was the idea that we wanted to ensure that staff and faculty also had a robust network of peers, access to high quality professional development, and the ability to really work as they do now, but in a larger pool with their peers, across the 8 towns. And then the third was really about combining resources, creating efficiencies, and advancing new programs that would potentially be enhancements in terms of opportunities, educational opportunities for students. The 4 tiles that you have at the bottom were just one of the many exercises that were done. This was some visioning work. It was initially set off around the focused on the high school, the 9 through 12. But in addition to that, we have a large educational indicators report that is online that really looks very closely at the school. And we also had some reports published by resource organizations such as Hanover that we contracted with. But just a couple things I wanted to call out. And one was that when we did our initial research, we saw a lot of commonalities between the 2 districts. The districts have a lot in common, and they do a lot with the resources they have. And I really want to call that out as a commendation. Your 2 school districts work incredibly hard to make sure kids have the highest quality opportunity they can with the resources they have. But both districts also have unique strengths that they do somewhat differently in terms of how they approach things, the programs that they offer. We believe that there is a benefit to pooling resources, combining them and sharing them, so that students again have access to all of them. I said that. We also believe that class size balancing, which is maximizing enrollment, not to the point where you have class sizes that are out of control or large, but ensuring that you're offering a calculus class in one high school with 5 students and in another school with 6 students. You can create one section of 11 students, and then create a teaching period to do something else with. So we call out, that's what I refer to as class size balancing, which is carefully using the teaching resources in an appropriate way. And then we know for sure that post graduation outcomes suggest a lot of your students don't get a college degree within 6 years. So the question is, are you all providing, not just the question here in South Carolina, but across the entire industry, the appropriate pathways through high school so that they can, experience preparation for a working career. And that's really where suggestion through vocational technical ed comes into play. So these were just a few of the bullets which are in your packet, and I really don't need to read all of them, but because you can read, I'm more confident. But just again, I call these out: increased educational. It just kind of makes common sense, right? If you have 2 different schools, they have slightly different offerings, and you put them together, all that becomes acceptable for everyone. In addition to that, we really thought expanding opportunities for extra and co-curricular, assuring that your student support services were aligned. That includes students with special ed needs, students who are English language learners, alternative education students. Those are all programs where it pool your resources. And I do want to commend the student support services staff in both schools who actually collaborate currently, and I think in a reasonably effective way. Then obviously really increasing support for faculty and ultimately diversity and scale of peer groups in the school. I put links on the slide and make sure that the slideshow gets shared with you all, but there's a link to the Ed Quality Report. There's a link to the report that Deb Phillips and her subcommittee prepared, which is fairly succinct. It's 2 pages long. And then we have a lot of frequently asked questions in addition to that. I did create just one additional slide on Ed Quality because this is something that we've heard in the couple of years that we've been involved in the project that people seem pretty interested in, and that is where are there opportunities to increase Chapter 74, which is vocational technical education, as defined in Massachusetts as part of the project. We're recommending that in the newly constructed high school, there will be 6 new Chapter 74 programs. This is part of Berkshire Hills' current plan with a smaller high school. We believe scale will allow more programs to be created. We have an advisory team worked for about 9 months on some very initial sketch outs. These are some of the programs that rose to the surface. These are the things that you're hearing in your community based on workforce needs, based on employment, based on wages, are those that appear to be needed in the southern part of Berkshire County, more generally in the region. So things like automotive tech and horticulture, which are currently programs with Berkshire Hills, in addition to that, public education care. A lot of the trades programs came up. We're hearing really across the board that trades are an area of high demand. And so, you know, how many trades programs can you support? Well, that'll have to be decided. You can't have them all, right? You can probably cherry pick a few that are going to be some high impact programs for you all. Culinary arts is something that we know that they have a program right now at Mount Everett, and we really, when we're thinking about designing this, we want to make sure that we're integrating the key features and the positive features in both of the high schools into this combined new high school. So we're pulling from the cultures and the existing programs that are happening in both the high schools currently. So in addition to that, we know there's great work happening in innovative pathways. There's an early college model at Mount Everett that is a point of emphasis and pride right now for the district. And then lots of ways in which you can organize electives to get to career-ready experiences for students. So after you lead with education, and it's interesting, when I first came to the table in 2015 to the Berkshire County Education Task Force, which was every district in Berkshire County saying, how are we going to manage money? It really was about money. It was interesting how that money conversation quickly shifted to, but money really impacts educational experience. And so I really take great pride in the fact that this committee really did lead with education and does believe there's an educational value proposition to be made. That being said, finance follows closely after. This particular slide shows you an aggregated version of all 8 town assessments, all pushed together over a bunch of fiscal years, FY26 to FY30. The gray bar is what you'll be paying if you don't merge. The blue bar is what you'll be paying if you merge. The blue bar is smaller than the gray bar. You have savings in the merger scenarios versus the non-merger scenario. You know, as Lucy pointed out, we have that unpacked by sub-region, and we have unpacked by every single town. And in your briefs on the website, you can click on your town and actually get a breakdown of what that will look like for your particular town. Right? Again, we have a couple core principles, and with Nadine standing up, it's a reminder for me to call Nadine out, who is the chair of the finance subcommittee, did a fantastic job leading this group. I think your group, not more than any subcommittee that we had, did an enormous amount of work in coming up with the methodology. There's just a few things that Lucy's already called out. The idea that there's potential savings as you collapse positions. There's efficiencies and coordination of services. There's the ability to engage in meaningful, coordinated things like grant making. And we wanted to make sure that the committee wanted to make sure that as we were working through this, that there were no stark losers and there were no stark winners. There are situations in all these financial models where you're going to see some towns go up, some towns stay about right, some towns dip down in the operating, and then there's a little bit of a reversal on the capital. But really, the bottom line is that we wanted to make sure that it was an equitable balance of fiscal liability going out to the town. The second part was that we smoothed the financial path forward. And we thought really long and hard about trying to come up with a system where there wouldn't be a large spike in a particular town in a given year. And so this idea of smoothing over time and year to year was very important to the subcommittee. And then obviously the questions around the capital methodology, specifically to the high school, were discussed at length. So I'm going to walk through, and I'll apologize because this is very high level, and we have about an hour presentation on all this on the website, and that's about how long it took for us to go through it. I'm not going to spend an hour with you today. I'm going to give you some high level stuff. So when we think about finance, two buckets: capital expenses, operating expenses, right? So those are our two buckets. Within capital, the subcommittee had to think about three capital sub-buckets. One was, what do we do? How do we get paid for the new high school, right? Which is part of this plan. Two is, how do we deal with existing debt, what we're with legacy debt that's still on the books when this merger occurs? And the third is, how do we deal with future debt down the road after the district is formed? Each of those is a particular category that the finance subcommittee had to deal with. Okay. So on the operating expenses, we pooled operating expenses with transportation and non-capital debt, even though they're really reported out separately, they all became aggregated together. So I'm going to walk you through just a couple of these to give you a kind of whet your appetite tonight, and then we'll answer questions as they come up. So we're starting with the capital methodology because I know a lot of folks want to get a sense of how this type will get paid for. So this model, this assumption that we put out, and it actually is an illustration in the draft regional agreement, assumes a $100 million 8-town high school. Okay, so we have a brief on our website which explains how we got to the 100 million. And do we know exactly what the high school is going to cost? Absolutely not. We use what we think is a reasonable research methodology to look at historical spending, current spending, square footage, a couple of different methodologies, and ultimately arrive at this 100 million is a good number to start from in terms of what we thought high school would cost. We have portioned the high school based on a starting point on 90% to the Berkshire Hills towns and 10% to the Southern Berkshire towns, with an understanding that there would be a 1% shift in that proportion beginning in 2033. You might ask, why in 2033? The reason in 2033 is that we are retaining the legacy debt that Southern Berkshire currently has with the Southern Berkshire towns through 2032. It's around 350,000 a year. And then when that money comes off the books, we begin to do this 1% shift. You can actually see this play out in the spreadsheets that we have online, and you can look town by town how it impacts your town as this transition occurs. So after the total amount of portion, I'm going to show you a graphic in just a minute. We then apply state aid. So the state aid we're estimating right now on base aid is around 54%. And then if you form a new region, the MSBA incentivizes that up to 6%. So we are factoring in the 6% incentive that would then be credited to the Southern Berkshire towns.
Base aid.
Yeah. So base aid is based on, in effect, the wealth of your community. Something like the way that they do Chapter 70, which is aid to the school. So the MSBA, the Mass School Building Authority, does calculations. I mean, Peter, you can certainly speak to this if you'd like to, but they evaluate the wealth of the community. They determine how much of a particular project can the community pay and how much will the state pay. So that that percentage was calculated based on what Berkshire Hills received. And I guess the last time we went through the study process, so.
So we anticipate it'll be at least 50%, and it might be as high as 55%.
Right, so I spoke incorrectly.
Yeah.
Total amount is 54%, base aid is 48%, and regional aid is 6%. Those two add up to 54%. And I think on the diagram it would be more clear. So let me get to that. But put my foot in my mouth again. All right, so we're walking through the schematic from top to bottom, just so you understand. And again, this visual will be available to you all. $100 million, 90 million goes one way, 10 million goes to the 5 towns. That's pretty easy math. But then we apply in the traffic aid, and this diagram is now correct, right? So the 48.52%, which I believe is the precise figure that Berkshire Hills got did not come through. And then 6% is the regional incentive aid. 48% is taken off of the 90 million, 6 million is taken off of 10 million, and what's left for the taxpayers is about 41.5 million on the Berkshire Hill side and 4 million on the Southern Berkshire side. The MSBA is important to know in this model contributes of the 100 million, $54.5 million towards the project. All right.
And Jake, the only thing, there's the possibility those percentages go up slightly, and we won't know till the MSBA talks with us again in October about it.
Yeah. One of the things that we built into the regional agreement is the possibility that other incentives would be added on. So if you use only the project manager at risk, you might get a percent. If you hit a certain green standard, you get another percent. All that would come off the top, at the very top. You just lower the cost before we start to prorate it out.
But they might also go down. True.
Excuse me?
But they might also go down.
No,
Those are additional incentives. Yeah. So I think maybe what your question is, could base aid go down?
Yes.
I think actually Peter is estimating it's going to potentially go up.
But I'm talking about reality. Our tax, they go down as well.
no, I don't think it can go down. We're waiting to hear what other things could happen. The thing that reality that would change is that the total cost of the project to go up, but their contribution, I think, is stable or going to come up.
All right, so just chugging down. After we take that money off, we then apply 3% for 25 years. People will tell me, oh, that's too low and the term is wrong numbers. Matt Abraham modeled it based on a particular thing. This is what he modeled on. We can certainly model on other stuff too. That results in annual debt service to Berkshire Hills of $2.45 million, because the Southern Berkshire towns of $236,000. All right. Then that gets put out to the town based on EQV within those subgroups. We then have that 1% shift we mentioned, which occurs over time, 2033 through 2038. That decreases the Berkshire Hills contribution, 2.3 million, increases the Southern Berkshire to 397,000. Then again, all that is apportioned out to the towns on an annual basis with equalized property value. So that is the capital model.
A point of clarification, please.
Yep.
When the study was done as far as the finances is concerned, for the 3.25% over 25 years.
Yep.
We all know what's been happening with interest rates over the last 12 months. So my question, the point of clarification is, at what point in time was that estimate done compared to where that interest rate may be today? Since we're talking about coming up in October.
Yeah. No, I mean, it's Matt Abraham does all this in the spreadsheet. We can simply move numbers. Do you want to know what it looks like with 8%? You want it?
Well, what I'd like to know is, what is the estimate for the financing percentage? Like when this project comes into fruition, because I mean, it's out there as far as what interest rates are for municipal debt, short term, medium term, and long term. So
So one of the things I think that I'll be talking about in a couple of minutes is the timeline on all this. And there is a secondary process we're going to be talking about, which is the debt vote on the high school as a contingency in all this work. Okay, so I think I'll answer your question then, except I can't tell you what the percentage will be, because
Right.
it'll be determined down the road.
Right.
Right.
Steve, do you have any other questions?
Sure. Yeah.
The plan is to get through our presentation and then allow the select boards and finance committee
Oh,
to ask their questions.
all right. You gotta keep me in line here.
Yeah.
All right, keep me in line. All right, so methodology for operating, we're gonna move into that. There's basically 3 parts to it. The first part, both school districts already do, simple. The regulatory methodology. The state determines your required local contribution, your town gets that, your district gets that, end of story. We kept it in there. We could have chosen not to keep that in there, but then we would have had to do what's called an alternative methodology, which requires annual approval by every town and the commissioner, annual. So forever, every year, we go through that. So we wanted to stay within the statutory methodology for sure. It has been kind of challenging the way we did it, very creative, but we think is a solution. The second part is you all know you pay more beyond what's required, right? Everyone understands that. Each of your communities pays more than what is required in Part A in the statute. So we're focused on how do we distribute the money over required. And the state doesn't have any rules on that. You can do what you want to distribute that money. So we decided that we would assess it based on required local contribution, assessed on a 5-year basis, which in effect is what Southern Berkshire does. And then you create an applicable percentage by each community, how much of that is the total, and then that gets distributed out. So it's Part A, Part B. Part A is not negotiable. Part B is really using a 5-year average required local to then distribute the required above, the amount above required. And then we put this interesting thing in, what we call a safety valve, a cap. And the cap was, we were trying to solve a little bit of a structural issue in bringing 2 different districts together, which is hard. Different spending patterns, different assessment methodologies. When we put it together, it can create a real abrupt change in year 1. And so we needed to really think about a smoothing mechanism. We had a couple early on, and this is the one we settled on, because we thought it also had a long-term positive impact for the 8 towns, and that is that no district's assessment would go up higher than whatever the overall average increase was in assessment plus 2%. So we're going to have that cap is the increase in what last year's assessment is versus this year's assessment in the aggregate. That's some percentage. And then we add 2% to that, and no town can go over that. All right. So illustrated, this is what FY26 would have looked like had you just put the district together without the cap. These are percent increases and decreases. You would have seen a really big spike in your Southern Berkshire towns, for the most part. You would have seen decreases in the Berkshire Hills towns. All right. So then what happens is where that green line is, we create a 3.2% cap, and let me just tell you how we derived that. There was a 1.2% increase in total assessments from FY25 to FY26. And you might say that's pretty low, right? That's a low assessment for 1 year. The reason it's low is because we applied savings in. We took that 1.5 million, we stuck it in there to drive everything down, right? Just so people know how that was. So 1.2 is fairly low, but for illustration, 1.2 is a change in assessment, 2% is a cap, as the safety valve. Those 2 add together to create a cap. No community can have an assessment this year that's 3%, more than 3% higher than the year prior. So all the Southern Berkshire towns basically have this cutoff line where all that additional assessment has to get redistributed to the towns that are under the cap. And when we do that, this is what we come up with. So it gets redistributed. The southern Berkshire towns end up at the cap, and the Berkshire Hills towns go up. Most are still under the cap, I believe, but they're not realizing the same state. We keep everyone under the 3.2%. And this model goes on every single year, and the cap will change depending on what the assessment is. The safety valve never changes. What we really believe it does is it controls these really kind of crazy spikes that can occur in a single year to town. All right. So that's the operating. These are snapshots of your worksheets. They're probably easier viewed online. If you go to the finance button on the home page and you go to the down the bottom and click on Egremont, you can blow them up and actually you can see them better. But there's a couple things. I put up fast facts. We put up the graphs over time, merger versus no merger. We compared it on a percentage basis. We compared the growth on a percentage basis. This last graph right here, I think, is really interesting because when you look specifically at what it would cost if the districts merged around contributions towards the high school and or paying for vocational tuition into the new high school versus contributing to the high school in the merger situation. And every single town has savings based on our model. Even the Berkshire Hills towns, because our assumption was that they're not going to build a $100 million high school, they'll build a $90 million. Guess what they don't get? They don't get 6% regional aid, which actually ends up costing them more than would be the price tag on a $100 million high school. Kind of interesting. All right, so with that said, check out your own town sheets. You get more information here. So I'm going to run through the timeline, right? This is the last slide. All right. And then we'll hopefully open up some questions. But I started with a slide that had 4 fiscal years on it. And I'll put the dates on just so you know very specifically the reference. So we're entering into the RN fiscal year 24 right now in the fall of 2023. What we have laid out here is 4 fiscal years. The state actually requires that when a vote occurs, that your newly formed district has to be operational within 2 fiscal years. So fiscal year you're in and then 1 more. We will be petitioning the state to get an additional year because of this contingency that's in the model that we're going to talk about right now. So what will happen is that the board in the next month will have the final regional agreement. They'll vote on it. They'll have a report. They'll send it to your select boards, and then within 30 days, you all will put it on a special town meeting, and the voters will vote. If they vote yes, then it goes to the commissioner, and the commissioner will sign off. Now, why will we know he's going to sign off? Because we've been working with Jesse every single week for the last however long.
Nice.
And so they vet all the language before it goes to him, and then he signs off after the vote is approved. Okay? So that starts the clock. And what we refer to as a transition period. And that transition period is a period in which your new district is not operational, it's planning to become operational, right? And so one of the first things that has to happen is you have to appoint the school committee. And that appointment will come out of the select boards in the 8 towns with the same proportions that you saw in the permanent school committee composition. All right, here we go. But then in November of 2024, you're going to have your every other year elections, right? And you're actually going to elect your school committee in the November elections of 2024, and then they will take over from that point forward. Your new district becomes operational on July 1, 2026, assuming we get our request from the state for special legislation to move the transition year back a bit. And then just so we're crystal clear, while your district is in your new district is in transition, it's very important that people know that Berkshire Hills and Southern Berkshire continue to operate. Right? So they operate and are in operation until the day that the new district becomes operational and they cease to exist. They dissolve at that, right? Couple of other things on here, new district transition point, the reason I put two colors here is just to show the transition between the appointed school committee, and then this is where your elected committee takes over. And then obviously your new district and operation kind of beyond that. So there's one more little hiccup in all this, just to make it a little bit more complicated for you. One is that the Mass School Building Authority, as you know, has invited Berkshire Hills in, they invited them into eligibility, and they recently invited them into feasibility. And interesting enough, they invited them in to study a 2-track project, a 3-town high school and an 8-town high school. We had to manage this as a situation we had to deal with, knowing that we needed to figure out whether the voters want to do this thing, right? So that's why we're heading towards a vote in October. But the reality is, if the high school weren't approved, then at the end of all the research that occurs in the MSBA feasibility, this is when you're gonna do your ed plan, you're gonna do your design, and then you're ultimately gonna create the cost of your high school, calculating out what's it gonna cost us, where do we stand with interest rates, how long the term gonna be. So at that point, everyone will know a lot of information about this new high school, that hopefully have to go to the voters for a vote. And that bond vote, we anticipate, will be, you'll see some things right here that Peter helped me put in. They're choosing their project managers right now, architects and designers, a little bit later in the year. But the vote will occur no earlier than July of 2024, but according to our agreement, has to happen by July of 2025. So one of two things. If the voters reject the high school bond, the regional agreement that was approved back here is nullified. The new district is not formed. Okay, so it's a check later down the road on this high school to assure that folks are still in the game here and everyone's on board with what this high school is going to cost, how we're going to contribute to it, et cetera. The other piece too is we had to put a little bit of a timeline in. So the second thing is if the vote doesn't occur by July 1 of 2025, the same thing happens. It's an unwind of the regional agreement. So we thought, and probably Lucy can speak to this as well as anyone, but we thought it incredibly fair and important that given the fact that, hey, in 2 months, people could be acting on this regional agreement without really understanding the cost of the high school, that we needed to put a checkpoint in further down the road on the high school to make sure everyone was still on board. Right?
Point of clarification. I'm sorry.
Yeah, so we're almost done.
I hear you, but the point of clarification on that one. So if it gets approved by the voters this October,
Yeah.
but then the bond, after all the cost estimates already come in, and then the bond gets rejected by the voters,
Right.
do we then go back to having 2 separate school districts?
Well, we actually, at the point of the bond vote, there are 2 districts still operating.
Okay,
And
and
the
then the whole
transition
thing does not go
And
forward,
the new district that's in transition just dissolved. That's correct.
so there's no harm in voting yes now. Okay, sorry. Well,
I don't think, I think, which is the,
So we are looking ahead and we just have.
oh yeah, I was looking at it, okay. Fine.
Yeah, why don't you take
Yeah,
over?
I can do it. So as I said before, the regional agreement is largely agreed by our board, but is still in the DESI vetting stage. I think we're nearing the end of that. But that's what's happening now with the regional agreement. Mainly language tweaks, nothing substantive so far, and we're not expecting anything substantive. Warrant language, we've got a draft warrant that we're going to be sending out to the 8 select boards to send out to your respective town council. Desi thought it very important that town council from each of the 8 towns is satisfied with the language of the warrant. And so we put a warrant article together for you. And it includes this debt approval contingency. So people understand the point you just made, right? That while you can vote yes in October, the formation of this new district is contingent on a couple of things, but most significantly, a positive vote on the debt that will be required to construct the new high school, and we won't have that number until next year. So that will be in the warrant. So we're going to be sending this warrant language out to all of you, and we ask you to get that out to your respective town council as quickly as possible, because Desi really wants to hear the town council has signed off on the warrant language. So that's coming up in the next week. I expect we'll get the warrant language out to you in the next couple of days. There's also special legislation that's needed. Jake already spoke to the need for special legislation to extend that transition year an additional year. I think we'll get it, but we need that special legislation in order to extend that transition period. We also need special legislation for something that should be permitted by law, but by force of nature isn't currently permitted. And there is no provision in the law currently that allows a regional school district to convey title to property, real property that they own. Strange, but true. So we need special legislation that says, if we approve this, if the 8 towns approve this and they want to go forward with a merger, the 2 separate regional districts are permitted to convey title to the buildings and land that they own into the new district. And so that is a contingency, although not as difficult a contingency, arguably to overcome than the debt approval contingency, which is very substantive and important. So there'll be special legislation. Again, timing is we expect DESI review to be finalized mid-September. That's what we're hoping for at least. And then we'll be able, once we get that final sign off from DESI, we'll be able to go back to our regional school district planning board for our final vote on the final language of the regional agreement, which we will then send off to the 8 select boards with our recommendation and report for placing on the special county law. We're going to continue with community education. We're going to have public forums. We're looking to schedule those in September and October. But we wanted to start with you. We wanted to start with the select boards. We wanted to give you an opportunity to ask us your questions and really discuss among yourselves what you think of the recommendation and the reasons that we think merger is the right path forward. So with that, I think, oh, I'm sorry, additional resources. Yeah, we've got a refreshed website. Our website, we've been, it's been an iterative process. So there's a ton of information on that website. Everything we've done is on the website, but we've redesigned the landing page to make it easier to find stuff now that we're in this final phase. So I really encourage you to go to that website and take advantage of the resources that are there. Okay. Yes, sir.
You had 2 slides, one where there was a huge discrepancy between the towns in terms of their financial obligations. And the second one was magically disappeared. Could you explain the magic?
I'm not sure which one.
What? He's talking about what it looks like without the safety net and what it looks like when you apply the safety.
This one here?
Yeah, how did you magically make that disappear?
I mean, disappear in what way? I mean,
Well, if you go to the next slide and
It's redistributed.
The one before that,
One
back
back.
one.
Go back.
It's both slides are up. That's why I had thought over there, just stand there when you're on.
oh, so this is how they make all the little animations happen?
Yeah.
No,
Carol,
he wants to know.
magic
how we
is-
got to 11.
We set the cap at 2%, so if the assessment was supposed to go up, 1% total for everybody on, for the entire district, no one town's gonna go up more than 2%. So if you look at that slide, that year Stockbridge should have saved 3.4%, but in actuality it goes up 2.4%. And the reason for that is that it's in effect smoothing out what the other towns would have to pay or would have to save. So no one ever saves a ton year to year, and no one ever gets charged a ton year to year.
Yeah.
In terms
Yeah,
of,
but what you're doing is you're stealing from Peter to pay Paul.
They're redistributing.
Pardon?
Who's paying? They're redistributing who's paying so that some towns don't experience an 18.
You're stealing from Peter to pay Paul.
but that's not, wait,
Well, I think was that Peter.
it's not stealing. The fact is that teachers make different amounts right now. There's a lot of things when you merge this together that they do have to figure out a fair way
But
to
if
bring
I,
all the costs together.
but if I take it correctly, I can't read, but Marlboro pays a lot right now. And that's that somebody subsidizing them, that's gonna be picked up by somebody else. Is that, am I reading that correctly?
Yes.
So if Peter's stealing,
I think it's more greater good.
that's correct, but I'm thinking about voters in our town. They'll say, we're gonna have to pay for somebody else.
Well,
Alfred has done that for a long time.
I'm not, I'm thinking about the voters in our town, how they will see this.
Which town? Which town?
Doesn't matter.
Yes, it does. Yeah, you just said our town, which town?
West Stockbridge.
The goal is to work as a unified district.
I understand, but I'm
And
just,
to share the
Okay.
increases as well as decreases if there are any. We can always hope the budgets will go down. And Southern Berkshire currently uses this 5-year rolling average to help us with our budget, so we don't have these huge spikes and declines. So we just took the same premise and applied it slightly differently because of the way the towns all work.
Also, the safety valve expires in 2032. It's tied to when the capital debt for South Berkshire is paid off. So in 2032, there's no more, this kind of scheme goes away after seal.
That's not accurate.
no, that's
So we got
I'm
one.
going to, I'm going.
I'm just trying to understand how this works, that's all.
The third, my role is
Okay.
chair, so that people on Zoom and other people can hear what's being said and people aren't talking over each other. So the
I
safety
just ask simple
valve,
questions, understand the ground.
the safety valve does not go away in 2032. The safety valve is baked into the agreement. And the design is kind of on the same design we currently have in Southern Berkshire, which is in order to help each other out year over year. We currently look in Southern Berkshire at 5-year rolling averages, so that there are not these spikes and dips among our 5-member towns year over year. This is the same concept. And it is designed to have us work together, and this is what I said at the very beginning, as a region. To start thinking about ourselves as a region, as a combined region, where we're going to work together and help each other out, so no town gets hit with a 17% increase in a year that another town is going down by 8%. That doesn't seem fair, that doesn't seem right. And so we designed the safety valve to implement this philosophy, which is we're going to work together as a collective region.
I was urged that that's not a very good argument.
Sure, yeah.
I want to address the question in the Rob Peter to pay Paul thing that you're referring to. So in the first year that we put the two districts together, the reason why Great Barrington would have such a
big decrease is because the two districts operate slightly different in their financial, in the ways they do their finances. So Great Barrington is going down because the Southern Berkshire towns have to suddenly all of a sudden go up when you put it down together. So really, who's being robbed is the Southern Berkshire towns, if you want to put it that way. And the reason why Great Barrington is saving so much is because we put the district together. So to avoid that, we've come up with a safety valve to ease all of that so that it doesn't have a dramatic effect on any town. So no one is getting robbed and no one is getting paid.
That's a far better argument than the one that was previously stated.
Okay. Well, I was just, that's what's happened.
That's a better argument.
And not an argument, it's a fact.
Whatever it is.
If I may enhance what this gentleman just pointed out, I'm Doug Newman, Finance Committee from New Marlboro. I just wanted to add to his very factual point. I'm glad you saw that was a nice, clear explanation. But in addition to that, in what you were also saying about us working together, it's kind of like without the Southern Berkshire School District towns, okay, and Berkshire Regional wants to build a new high school, okay, you're going to get more money for the high school under the state programs, right? Wasn't that what I heard earlier? Was that there are monies there that are advantageous that we will receive. I think it was something like $10 million or so that will go towards building the new high school because the state is incentivizing regional school districts to merge. So really, Peter and Paul are eating together off the same plate because we're helping each other out. And what the benefit is for the Southern regional kids is that they're going to have a state-of-the-art high school to be able to attend. And if we didn't do it, they could opt in anyway, and Berkshire Hills would be footing the bill for the whole new high school.
I'm just trying to get an argument that I can explain myself.
I would
Did what I'm just saying make kind of sense?
propose it is like this. Southern Berkshire's operating expenses are $4,000 to $5,000 less per pupil than Berkshire Hills. So the operating expenses will go up for Southern Berkshire to meet Berkshire Hills eventually. But instead of us taking the hit at 17% right up front, they're just going to slowly increase our operating expenses till they match Berkshire Hills.
Okay. But the overall operating expenses are coming down because of the merger. So there's pluses and minuses to make it all kind of work. Is the way I'm hearing it.
You're right. I think we could have done a better job.
My name is Beth Jean. I'm a select board member in New Marlboro, and I have 3 young children in the New Marlboro Central School. So I don't know if everyone here understands that in the Southern Berkshire District, we actually have 3 school buildings. We have the Undermountain and Mount Everett campus here in Sheffield, New Marlboro Central, and New Marlboro and South Hagamont schools, which are some of the last remaining small rural schools that we have probably in this country. So speaking from the perspective as a parent of young children in the school, I just want to raise a question and also speak from my experience, which is that I've been consistently impressed with our administration in the Southern Berkshire District, the one-on-one attention that my children get in the Southern Berkshire District, the small class sizes, the community involvement, the administration's focus on innovation as evidenced with our new collaboration with the Transcend Group, and its focus on our small schools, maintaining them and keeping them operating is no small feat. Also, one argument in favor of merging is that our students just might not have as many extracurricular activities available to them since we are a smaller district. I found that not to be the case. Even though we are a small outlying school in New Marlboro, my kids are able to ride a bus to the main campus to participate in extracurricular activities. So getting to my question, before I pose it, I just want to say that satisfaction among parents, and I've spoken with many parents in our district over the years. I'm born and raised here, so quite familiar. I actually attended the district myself. Satisfaction is very high. Our confidence in our administration is very high. And most parents in this region really appreciate having the choice of sending their children to either Southern Berkshire or Berkshire Hills District. So one thing that hasn't really been very clear through this process, which I've followed, is what will happen to our small outlying schools. And I've read the regional agreement. I understand that there would be a process that would have to take place before any decision was made to close them. But Jake, I've heard you say that initially this conversation is about the high schools merging, but eventually it would make sense to align efforts across all of the schools and eventually probably merge the elementary schools as well. So my question is, what would be your vision in terms of a timeline for that to happen? Just so, voters can have that information before they go to the polls in the end of October.
Yeah, so your question had two parts to the number eight. You heard me say something about alignment, then something about elementary merger. I don't think I've actually said anything about elementary merger, but I've said a lot about alignment. So the idea around alignment is the idea that, well, the easy example for me to speak to is when I was in Pittsburgh, we superintendent, we had 8 elementary schools. So the idea is you have lots of folks teaching 3rd grade reading and 3rd grade math. And the question is, how aligned do you want those folks teaching across those schools? And there's advantages to aligning your approach around professional training, getting resources and materials that are consistent and high quality, creating peer groups where teachers can exchange their own experiences. There's also, we found in Pittsfield, times in which letting a school go innovative, doing something different can also be a really helpful experiment in thinking differently about how you might test drive a different curriculum. But I've talked a lot about alignment because I think there's some real value in aligning the approaches across the elementary schools. My sense would be, we attempted to do a little of this work as part of the envisioning work. We shifted it 100% to the high school. And part of that was just, I think, people have a lot on their plate right now, but I would expect that if the vote were affirmative, we do this 8-town thing, that the opportunity to bring elementary teachers together, pre-K, K teachers together, elementary teachers, middle school teachers together, to talk about how they are approaching their work would offer nothing but a lot of benefits. And whether that alignment happens tomorrow or down the road over time, it seems to me that that's something that the new school committee and the administration would work through. As far as the long range plan, I don't have any conceptions about it. If you want to just be brutally honest about closing New Marlboro or closing South Raymond, we've not made that recommendation. And in fact, the regional agreement has some of the most aggressive protections DESE is telling us in school closures that they've seen in regional agreements. So we wanted to be sure that you all understood that that wasn't the intent of the development of this model. That helped at all.
Yeah. So the quote was, this is what you said on May 23rd. The board's proposal is that the elementary and middle schools stay as they are currently. There really is going to be no change immediately. Clearly, you'd want to align your efforts around teaching and learning across your schools over time, but the immediacy was really on the idea of the merged high schools. So, the impression I got from that comment was that eventually we'd be looking at merging elementary schools. I mean, it would make sense if we had the same administration to have merged elementary schools as well. And I just feel like we need to have some more transparency and flesh that out a little bit more before we can make an informed.
Well, I actually made the argument in our report that I thought keeping younger age kids closer to their homes in the community was an important an important thing we should focus on, and we should strive for. So that's actually in the report, and we said very specifically that. And I still believe that. But in terms of opportunities that can be offered at larger high school, I'll stand by that.
The other thing I wanted to mention just is that the numbers in terms of the school enrollment decline are based on kindergarten and up, correct?
Yeah, we report the numbers both ways.
Okay, so just to mention that New Marlboro has had to add additional classrooms for our pre-K because it's grown the last 2 years. So we're seeing actually that maybe the trend is not as bad as we thought it was.
Yeah, what I'd love to see is 100% pre-K kids in programs. That's something I've been on the record on for years. So go for it. The question is your birth rate up? You got more kids. They're competing in.
Well, we can also have a housing crisis, so that's another issue.
So,
I think it's very interesting what you bring up in that, but you know, we do retain those kids in pre-K, K. South Egremont was was an absolute model for that. We had 25 kids in each one of those classes. But as time goes on, those kids left. They went to Steiner, they went to Berkshire Hills, they went to private school where they were homeschooled. There's a lot of studies done that by the Southern Berkeley Regional School District. Where did those kids go? So what happens after
all those places
what
too?
happens after, please let me finish. What happens after those kids in 6th grade? And I think that's what we're addressing. We know that we want to keep those small schools. I think we really need to keep our eye on the ball, merging the two high schools together. And know that at some point, there'll be a discussion about it, but there's no immediacy for it. Or is it something that this committee has been working on, trying to do?
Yeah, a couple of things I just want to add. I just want to be really clear that closing the elementary or middle schools in either district is not part of this proposal. There is currently a Southern Berkshire Regional School District a process, a method for closing small schools. You have it now in your existing agreement, right? And the process we've put together in the new regional agreement has more process, more protections than you currently have under your existing agreement. So there's always a possibility in the future that some members of your school committee, and you know this happened some number of years ago, there's actually litigation among the towns of the Southern Berkshire Regional School District about closing one of the small schools. That exists now. And so that possibility is there now. And it will be there with a combined district, but the process that we've built into the regional agreement to make sure that decision is, if it ever comes to the fore, is one that is widely supported and well thought through, is more robust than the process currently done under the agreement. One other point about school choice, and that's why I addressed it early on. If you're interested in having flexibility and being able to go to this school or that school, the merger has lots of provisions that encourage that, right? So you can choice within the district. There is intra-district choice available.
Not for high school.
Well, not for high school, but let's talk about it, right? If we don't merge, right? And a new high school is built in Great Barrington for 485 kids. Right now, the high school is built for what, 700 plus kids, Peter? If a new high school is built for 485 kids, how many spots are there going to be for kids from the Southern Berkshire towns in that new high school? Not many, not many. And right now, in many of the towns, I think maybe all of the towns except Sheffield, about 50% of the high schoolers are currently choicing into Berkshire Hills right now. 50%. 50% of everyone. Well, Egremont and other towns as well, something in that range. So whether it's 50% or 30% or 40% or 20%, the point is that if you have a high school bill.
Wait, I'm sorry, is it 20% or 50%?
In Egremont, there are 31 high schoolers who go to public school. 16 of those 31 have choice into Berkshire Hills.
Well, we also
And
know that it goes to other
so
places.
my point is, in terms of
Right.
you're not going to have the same ability if you're in Alford, if you're in Egremont, if you're in New Marlboro or Monterey, to choice into Berkshire Hills that exists now. Yeah, go ahead.
In addition to that, if you could speak to, if the merger didn't happen, the cost of a student wanting to take vocational programs in the Berkshire Hills merger in the 3 towns, how much would that cost? Because if there's a vocational program in Monument today, and there was a 3-town merger, 3-town, if it's the same, how much extra would that cost? Because I think that's getting kind of lost too, that they would actually have to pay
Yeah,
to
so
go into those vocational
it
programs.
works differently than choice work.
Yeah.
And Jake, you want to speak to what that tuition cost is when a kid in a town wants to go to a chapter 74 program? The town in which that kid lives has to pay the cost. And it's not $5,000 a kid. It's closer to, what are we estimating? $26,000 a kid, including transportation, because you're required to provide transportation. And that cost is paid by the individual town, not by the district. So each town gets hit with that tuition cost in the year the kid elects to go into a chapter 74 program. So it's a very significant cost.
And under the new routine, there would be no additional cost
Correct, because we would be part of the district.
of this.
Yes. Go ahead.
Yeah, here.
It's a question.
She just said it.
Okay.
Just said it would be 26,000 per student that the child comes from.
So if you're interested in the 5 ton per town and your finance graph sheet in 2 pages, the last graph is a picture of no merger with associated vacation tuition in choices based on our estimated numbers of participation. You'll see an actual number for your town that we calculated out you would be sending potentially to Berkshire Hills on tuition, and I contrasted that against what you would be paying as a capital cost towards the high school. Okay. If you're looking for that data.
Any more questions from our select board's finance committee member?
I just have a question. If you go back a few slides, the educational choice is part of it.
This one,
You know, back one. Keep going there. There was one, well, it was the one that said, about the advanced placement and,
The number of programs.
the programs. And the programs that were, programs in a different slide.
oh, I'm sorry, this one right here. Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah.
I have a question on, you have there's a town debate on plumbing and electrical.
Yeah.
And then an absolute no-go on HVAC, construction, craft labor, animal science, and biotechnology. Why is that a no-go?
One of the things I really recommend that you do is check out that advisory brief that we put together, because the feedback was based on the individuals who participated in advisory. They evaluated the program for a variety of things. I could give you very quickly a snapshot that the feeling on biotech is that it's not established enough in the county to have solid partners, because one of the things the kids have to do in the Chapter 74 program, they have to do field experiences starting their junior year, and typically it's all their senior year, half days or week on, week off. And so that, I mean, I'm giving an example on that specific one, is why that was the case. We looked at,
The HVAC and the construction contract labor.
one of the things this is an interesting question, because everyone, if I ask everyone what is needed vocation in Berkshire County, almost everyone says the trades, right? Almost nobody who doesn't say the trades of some sort, but there's a lot of trades, right? And as I said earlier, you gotta kind of make a decision which one to do. We looked at two other programs, construction, craft, labor, and building property maintenance, as two possible programs that integrate elements of the trades into the entire experience, right? It's a little bit more of a survey course. We felt that the construction and craft labor, the way the standards are written, and Frank Cody's written it, he could probably speak better than I can, are really written more for road work, big construction work, things of that sort. Whereas the building property and maintenance has a little bit more of an inventory of, hey, you gotta learn a little bit of plumbing, a little bit of electric, you gotta know how to fix drywall, you gotta know how to paint, you gotta know how to replace a roof shingle, things of that sort, understand basic HVAC stuff. But really, at the end of the day, folks felt pretty compelled about carpentry as a direction, also in that the carpentry strand could potentially spin kids in high school into the other construction trades. Yeah. And there's a couple folks around the advisory in the room who certainly can speak to it, but
Yeah, Jay, I was just real quick, it might be helpful if you expanded a little bit on the makeup of the advisory group, because we're just hearing advisory group. How did that come about?
Oh goodness, I had to go back into the report and actually remember who was on it.
Oh, I don't need specifics.
We had a couple people from VCC, Regional Employment Board. We had like Steve Boyd was on it from business. We had, Will Compton, teenagers, and campaign. Obviously understanding what are kids facing when they're in community. What do they need if they're in the community, low credential, need to get the skills to move forward. The whole list of people are in the report at the very last page here. But it really spanned, I think, workforce, education, and some people who are just in the field.
It just, with the people that I meet in our town, guys who have business and stuff, it just kind of woke me up when I saw the no-go, just as you were changing the sign.
Yeah.
And I said, well, geez, my friends that are in the HVAC business cannot find them.
Yeah.
My friends that are in the construction business cannot find them. The vets around here can't find them. And so just that kind of stuff is continuing. And it wasn't like a hotly debated thing. No, it just said no go. It just stuck in my head.
Yeah, I know. The reason I said no go is because we just kind of categorized programs, and I think the feeling of some of these programs, we still none of this has been implemented. We have no authority. This is
right. I understand that.
It did some work.
I had that question in my head, and that's what I think about.
But there is not a plumbing program in Berkshire County.
Yeah, but Billy brings up a really good point, because I had the same kind of thoughts going through my mind when this slide came up.
Yeah.
And, where we are physically located, okay, we are actually fairly close to some very high-tech companies in northern Connecticut and on the New York side. I'm almost positive there is a biotechnology company in Pittsfield.
Yeah.
I used to work with General Dynamics. They have a big internship program, and there's a high-tech center in Pittsfield. And what I'm hoping for out of the whole process, obviously Rome wasn't built in a day, but I would like to see our children being offered some very high-tech vocational training in addition to these much-needed trades. It takes months for me to get my plumber to come in and do I get that, And so, yes, there's definitely training needed specifically for where we are in Berkshire County. But I would like to see opportunities for our children in even higher tech that are kids that are not gonna go on to college, but who can be trained, because there are major corporations that are looking for high-tech, educated young people to operate, these computerized machines in factories, and there's big paying jobs. And that's what I'm hoping for out of this whole thing, is going forward, a generation, 2 generations, 3 generations of our children, because that way they can at least stay somewhat locally. Because I think what a lot of us are finding, I certainly in my case have, that our kids move far away. And, we're very happy that our son came back to Connecticut, so he's only an hour and a half away. And I think a lot of parents in our community would prefer to see their kids an hour away working at United Technologies, down near Bradley Airport. They've got lots of work there, and in East Hartford and what have you. I'm glad to hear that this is not all set in stone.
No, I want to make one of the points there's another category for it called innovative pathways.
Mhm.
So there's kind of 3 layers about kids might get exposure, right? One is a full-blown Chapter 74 program, which is highly regulated and overseen by the Department of Education. Innovative pathways, both high schools have innovative pathways currently, or they're adding them.
Mhm.
And these are other ways in which kids can get free career skills training in trades without being a full-blown Chapter 74. Interestingly enough, the advanced manufacturing pathway, some places is over here in Chapter 74. Steve was actually one of the ones who said, I like the flexibility of having it on the innovative pathways side.
Mhm.
We could move probably a little bit more nimbly outside of the Chapter 74 framework.
Mhm.
So, I mean, it's interesting coming from a guy who needs people hired, right, in their particular trade. So the point I'm making here is that it's not as if these were just discarded, right? They were just set in another category,
Okay.
which is kind of it. And then we also think it can get exposure to elective, right? 1 or 2 electives.
And the other futuristic side of that coin is if we have those kinds of educational high-tech opportunities, it may draw high-tech companies to come into our area if we have trained workforce.
Lucy, I would really like to say, Barbara Marshall, Finance Committee, the model. I really think, first of all, I appreciate this group. I was part of the group 35 years ago when we discussed our first merger, and I kind of wish we did it then. But here we are again today talking about another school. Well, I would like, first of all, my family I have all teachers and administrators in my family. So in my extended family, so I understand the fear of letting go and joining together, okay? What terrifies me looking at this is looking 7 years down the road. Because 7 years down the road, Southern Berkshire will not exist. Wait a minute. 7 years down the road, we are not going to be able to afford $22 million to educate 400 children. We're not going to be able to do that. We need to start thinking about that and figuring out how we're going to solve it. When we built the K-12 here, we promised people that we wouldn't close the smaller schools. I understand that. I liked having my children close to home, but I also had a daughter that went on the bus to Monterey 2.5 hours every day. She was on the bus for kindergarten, which is, hour and a half there, hour and 15 minutes back. So again, I love my children. I love my grandchildren. We need to figure this out. And again, we are not going to be able to offer our kids in high school, or it's gonna actually bleed down into the elementary school. We're not going to be able to offer. And when you have half as many students in 7 years, you're going to have half as many teachers. So there will be layoffs. We gotta figure out how to do this, educate our communities, and do what is best for our children. Thank you.
Work together.
Okay, other finance committee members and select board members, before we open it up for public comment.
Lee Davis, Great Barrington. I have a question about the population projections with a new high school. I would think that chapter 74 would actually bring potentially a lot more families into the area wanting to take advantage of this. I see this a big draw for families looking to move somewhere, especially with the migration we're seeing with the climate and various things. Was that part of your projections? Seeing that if we added 6, we had a total of 6 chapter 74s that we might actually bring more people in the areas seeking to have their students attend the school?
Actually, that must be the letter, but I'm gonna let Peter speak to it because he is on the front end. If you don't mind me putting it at the top here.
Yeah, no, so the two numbers that we're talking about with the MSBA are 485 and 620, and the 485 is for the 3 towns and the 620 is for the 8 towns. They do a really rigorous process, like exhaustive and exhausting. And they look at where kids are in kindergarten and who's coming up. They look at birth rates of kids before school. They project it all out because Berkshire Hills currently is one of the tuition sites for Richmond, which ends in 8th grade, and for Farmington River, which ends in 6th grade. They give us a little credit there. They give us like the shiny new building credit. So the new building, there's always an increase in enrollment type of a new building, and they anticipated the impact of the additional vocational programs. So, and then they ran it, we ran our own, and then they hired another firm, NISTEC, to also run it. So we think those numbers are really right on.
Thank you.
Yes, sir.
First on the biotech, just as a reminder,
No,
there's a great deal of biotech involved in clinical laboratories. Almost every clinical test you get done by the doctor involves biotech. So the technicians involved in biotech training. That's a slam dunk to have training in that area. My greater concern is brick and mortar is wonderful. My concern is that you have reserve enough money, and I was almost urged doing that now, reserve enough money to have programs to fill those buildings. I'm afraid you're going to look down and say, we spent so much money, we don't have money left for the programs to fill those buildings. I've seen that. I'm sorry, I'm very old. Buildings where you have the same teachers, not enough programs to make all the promises that you put in place here, to put them in place, and the same programs. And I've looked, as Peter knows, tried to look at the outcomes analysis of the kids that graduate now, and it's disappointing. Lots of deficiencies. You got to get programs in. The buildings are nice, but it's the programs that matter. Okay, you got to get science, you got to get enough foreign language. Those are the things that matter. Okay, so reserve the money for that. That's the important part. Okay.
Justin Nagle from Monterey. Speaking of buildings, is there a plan on what would happen in Mount Everett High School building if there were no new school going to it?
Well, yeah, it's a question that's come up a lot, what happens around Everett. And as you know, this merger model contemplates that grades 6 through 8 will remain at Mount Everett, right? So still have kids in Mount Everett. Now, will the building be more less utilized than it currently is? Yeah, obviously, because we're taking 9 through 12 out of Mount Everett and putting in the number but it's underutilized now, right? So the question here is whether we want to focus on maximizing building utilization or maximizing student opportunity. And the conclusion of our research team and our board is that American High School is going to give kids more choices, more opportunities, more support,
and benefit the kids. In terms of the space that would be available at Mount Everett, once we move those kids over, no. There are many different possibilities for use of that space. Has our planning board decided what that space should be used for? No. That will be up to the new school district to consider all of the possibilities. Using that space for adult education, using that space for nonprofit space. There are lots of different possibilities and opportunities, but we haven't determined what that would look like. That would be up to the new school district, the new school committee and the new school.
So I graduated from Mount Everett in 2016.
Yeah.
And when I went there 7 years ago, it wasn't really underutilized space. There were no abandoned classrooms. And I just fear that without any kind of a plan, we'd end up with a semi-abandoned building like you see in Barrington, Housatonic, which I don't think is good for the community. And I think I've also been somewhat involved in the past couple of years at the old Colburn School in New Marlboro. And at least if you abandon a whole building and a whole piece of property, something can be done with it. If Mount Everett is left half abandoned, because when I went there recently, middle schoolers and high schoolers were intermingled on the upper floor and the lower floor of the main square building and using the gym and whatnot. If you take the high schoolers out, there's not a clear space where you could host, bringing adults in at night, because middle schoolers would still be in all of those rooms. And I don't know, that's a reservation that I have, is we don't want a semi-abandoned building that would be bad for the community, especially right next to elementary schoolers and half used by middle schoolers.
Yeah.
I know that that's something you didn't address, but I think that it really should be addressed in some way, shape, or form before a vote is taken to move the lifters.
Well, I think it's really premature for us to make a decision on that, given that we're talking about the new district becoming operational in July 2027. Right? That's quite a ways out. And there are creative ways to utilize overcapacity. I think the school committees will find those creative ways. We've found ways to use space in that building before. I remember when Barrington Stage was putting on performances in that building. I mean, there are ways to bring that beautiful building into full use. And we recognize that it will be something that is challenge, but also an opportunity for the new district to make good use of that space.
Right.
Kate, is there anything you want to add to that?
No, the only thing I'll say is that buried in the mounds of report, we haven't had that say that there is a little facilities report. And it does have a section which I did a little lit study on best practices and sort of repurposing and thinking about ways to deal with buildings. It's not a roadmap. It doesn't answer the question you have, but it does have ideas on how you might approach that particular utility of space in the building, for what it's worth. One of the lower red reports that we put together did get a lot of circulation.
We have a select board question on Zoom. I just want to let you know.
Okay, let's take that. I don't have the Zoom right
here. Listening.
May I speak, Lucy?
All right, George.
Yes, I would like to speak to the person that no one has identified themselves by town and by person, so I'm a little confused. but I was very impressed by the person that spoke before Jace and before Lucy about what would happen to the capacity of well-maintained entire campus of Mount Everett when we add more capacity to combine two districts. And so we have more unutilized capacity as a result and more debt.
Yeah, I think I just addressed that question more. Jake, is there anything more you wanna, yeah, take a turn, anything more you wanna add to my just talking? I see the hands, I recognize you. I just wanna make sure that we get the questions of the select boards and finance.
Eileen Marcus, Monterey Finance. Thank you. A really great job. We like the cast, everything. What I'm really not hearing a lot about though is the early grades. We talked a lot about the high school, and we didn't really talk about a lot of the early grades. We also didn't talk anything about where the districts don't combine, like special ed and places that they really do have very different operating guidelines. So I know as a Monterey Finance Committee trying to help our select board, and someone said before, I'm trying to make up an argument, right? What am I gonna tell people? We would really appreciate the technical briefing. You to see the formulas and methodologies, because what Jake talked about, class size balancing, we're keenly aware of state mandates on ratios, breakage, and things like that. We want to make sure that the way that the numbers play out, we see whole numbers, where they are in each grade, because I think that we heard from at least one parent, but as it goes in the younger years, that's how it will go if they stay here for the older years. So it's really important that we do a really good job in the elementary years to retain our family and want them to stay in the system. So if you could find the time to do a technical briefing on the methodology, the assessment, all the kind of things that we walk through for the finance committee members, I think that would go a really long way in helping us to make these arguments.
Great. I know we've got a date on the calendar.
Yeah, September 2nd, Tuesday in September.
But if you want a separate meeting for just finance, just let us know, shoot us an email.
Okay.
And
Monterey meeting, we're talking about really digging into the methodology, so we understand.
absolutely. Yeah. I'm happy to do that. Okay. Any other finance? Okay.
Mine has more to do with the design of the building itself. Is is there already a committee on that? Who's that on that committee? And because there hasn't been a vote or anything, so
right.
Obviously the need for that is already happening. Are any designs going to be on the website? And then are they going to be running dollar values? So because I know we're talking about $100 million, but that was a couple of years ago. So $900 million is this year is like on the design phase.
Right. So right now Berkshire Hills has a building committee that's doing that work for a renowned high school. In order for us to get on the ground floor and be part of that design work for an 8-town high school, we need to vote to create a new town district. And so that's why we've got sort of this chicken and the egg. So we want to take the vote on the merger. If the towns say yes, then we get to participate in the design of not just the building, but the program for the high school. And that would be happening at the transition school committee level. And so we would participate. If there's a positive vote in October, that transition committee gets appointed immediately, and they get to start working on that design of the high school and of the program.
Currently in their committee is it educators as well as school board members, they're part of that design.
Lucy, can I speak? to
Yeah.
that? So Berkshire Hills currently has a 17-member building committee. That's community people, business people, members from the school committee, educators, parents, students, a whole range of people. And there's a very prescribed MSBA process, really prescriptive, and we're working through that. We ranked owners, project managers to help us move forward. We're going to an MSBA meeting in early September, and hopefully they approve one of those. And then that group will then help us select architects and designers to proceed in the next stage. Lucy's right about the timing of this, so an October vote would feed into that nicely. And then at that point, likely there'd be an expansion or a reconfiguration of that building.
For representation to include the Southern Berkshire School District.
Yeah. Well, at that point, it would be the broader newly envisioned district, right? So would it be including, it would be expanding to include all 8 towns.
Right.
But wouldn't it be prudent to get community buy-in sometime?
That's what they are.
People who are finance or select board members, please, who have questions, please raise your hand. Everybody else put your hands down. Okay. Yes, sir. Please identify yourself.
Finance.
Okay.
Question. How was it determined to concentrate in Great Barrington instead of utilizing the facility that exists in Sheffield? Because that seemed to be a theme in a couple of the comments here of underutilized space that would accommodate a centralized school, which I think is quite a good idea. Just geography?
Geography is a big part of it. So I think the map is really helpful to look at. People could keep their conversation down so people on Zoom can hear what's being said that you really don't. Thank you. So Great Barrington abuts all 7 towns. Sheffield abuts three of the other towns. So in terms of geography, Great Barrington is obviously more central for the 8 towns than is Sheffield. The other issue is cost, right? So Berkshire Hills is already in the pipeline for state aid of well over 50% of the cost. Right? If we were going to do more construction in Sheffield, and if we want to have CBTE facilities, right, in the new Merton High School, there would be new construction. There would be no state aid available, at least in the foreseeable future, for construction at a site other than the Great Barrington campus of Berkshire Hills. So those were the primary reasons. It's also the case that Mount Everett currently, if we keep grades 6 through 8 at Mount Everett, doesn't have space to add all of the high school students plus the 6 through 8. Maybe in 5 or 10 years, when enrollment declines more, maybe there would be, but right now there is. Unless you want to move 6 through 8 somewhere.
So in very, very simple numbers, and excluding the geographic question for a moment, the dots on the map that shows where everybody's coming from, what would the cost increment be of the cost comparison, if you will, all in from doing it in Great Barrington and doing it in Egremont if we wanted to achieve the educational goals that are presumably the real reason for doing all of it.
I mean, all in Sheffield?
Yes, sorry.
Yeah, Jay, I don't know
There are a
that
number for that.
we even explore that possibility because it's being unrealistic, right?
Transportation alone.
And transportation
Would be astronomical.
I mean, just look at how far the northern part of Stratford and West Stockton would be from. Pretty sure it'd be. It is for you. Okay, other finance questions? Go ahead, Charles.
Thanks, so, my name is Lee Ekman. Elementary principal for South Berkshire. Yeah, I lost my voice after waiting an hour and a half to speak. I apologize. So no, in all seriousness, and I appreciate piggybacking on your question. I would like to understand because I'm grappling with more. If we're being fiscally responsible here, at what point did we abandon? If it's just geography, the commute's already. It's not a great distance, and we have a functioning, thriving school in Mount Everett right now, and it does feel like from 2019 when this process was first, manifested, that there was a foregone conclusion that ultimately Berkshire Hills wanted to build a new building. And to just speak briefly to your comments about us being closed in 7 years. This is my 6th year in the district, and among the elementary schools, pre-K through 5, enrollment has slightly increased. And although the narrative out there is larger scale about how we become smaller, I think in the face of the pandemic and people choosing to homeschool in the housing affordable crisis, it's relevant that we haven't only sustained our enrollment, but it's gone up. So thank you. I appreciate it.
Could you identify yourself?
Anna Dwyer from Great Barrington Finance Committee, and my questions are really particularly about the finances, particularly the safety dog chart. Again, it's something about me. I was surprised to see these sort of extreme variations when I thought the rolling average would take those away. Is that just because that's the first year, or is that based on a yearly assessment on a rolling average?
No, the extreme variation that you saw in that chart was before application of the safety.
I understand that, but it's based on a 5-year rolling enrollment. It was based on a single year. Okay. So it doesn't already take into account the rolling and average enrollment that reduces the amount of variability as well, correct?
I'm not sure about the answer to that question.
Okay.
You know, I think what she's saying is the chart that we showed before we applied safety. Did that incorporate the rolling average? In other words, that chart shows rolling average, but no safety path, close to nothing at all.
I think you guys give the base on it.
Yeah, I have that math.
I think it might, but we would need to check on that. You could let us know.
It's actual numbers before we is any new calculations compared to what the new situation would be. So you couldn't, we didn't, you and Matt didn't create historical numbers under our new methodology. So it's that first year changing everything.
Base year was last year.
But part B already had the rolling average, right? A statutory B's rolling average at B.
That's why I need to check on that question.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I think, my best guess, and I would second that, that the no merger situation projections were based on whatever the methodology is the district going to use projecting forward.
she's not talking about no merger, she's talking about the chart that shows the 17% increase. Did that chart include a 5-year rolling average?
Yeah, I
And
think
then,
that went backwards.
yeah.
But the base year was under the existing, so it's comparing
That's correct.
the actual numbers that were the assessment for all the towns to what the new formula would be, so that's why you had to, you know.
So would we use the rolling average enrollment moving forward?
Yeah.
So that should reduce some of the variability itself, correct? Or no?
Yeah, I mean, we actually talked about a couple of smoothers, the 5-year being one.
Right.
Safety valve being one, 2%. There's a couple of smoothers still. Yeah, 5-year rolling is also smoother, you're correct.
Okay.
Yeah.
It wasn't enough of a balancer.
At the time.
When we, I can't even tell you how many formulas we looked at, but just the 5-year rolling average made it so that the Southern Berkshire towns were still seeing huge increases. And we just knew that that was not gonna work for us.
And then the other thing I guess the request is that, there's been some discussion about school choice and who is choicing into where from where. And do you have that data somewhere on the website or could you make that available?
Yeah, I mean, the enrollment work that we did, on that particular topic is probably at least a year old. But we, there's an enrollment report that slices and dices enrollment a lot of different ways. It'll tell you where every single kid in your district comes from, what town in Berkshire County or outside the county. We have a graphic on the presentation we did. It sort of shows the movement between the two districts. One of my researchers said, you already activate town region because your kids are going all over the place. They're already moving. You already got lots of movement.
And that's under the, which tab on your website?
Yeah, if you, if I could, I'll make, yeah, no, I'll send you directly, but, you know, if you need, we can refresh whatever, right? And I did refresh some of the numbers for Charles. And I will look forward to seeing the October 1 numbers this year, because Charles is claiming your numbers are going up, and our numbers that we have from tech data, which are go through this current year, do not show that. Yeah. Yeah.
Coming back to several people have asked about.
Name and place.
Sorry, Susan Cooper, Monterey, selector. Coming back to Ann's question, and several other people have talked about the chart you have with the big jump of 18% increase. How much of that increase is coming from the transition to the Berkshire Hills district spending more per child and the Southern Berkshire district spending somewhat less per child, which then if we're going to the, you know, the combined model that has a per child cost of that higher amount, the whole operating budget being that much higher, and that's why that number boosted to 18%. I'm just posing that as a, you know, something no one has mentioned. It seems like it could account for an 18% increase, which is seems like it's more than just an issue of a 5-year rolling average. Is my point.
Teacher salaries go up.
I thought we just put the two budgets together. I was chairman of the finance committee, and it's months and months and months ago since I looked at that iteration. But I think what that chart shows is that we just put the two separate district budgets together, assuming a certain percentage of increase in each budget, because I think we were looking at perhaps a 2026 proposed budget.
Right.
And I believe that it was just a matter of blending those two together, that without a rolling average, but I can't guarantee that without going back and looking. I'm so sorry.
That's okay.
But your point, your underlying point is correct, right? And that's what Colin spoke to earlier. Berkshire Hills does pay more per student to educate their kids than does Southern Berkshire. Now, the question is why? And do we think that's a good thing or a bad thing, right? So, for example, Southern Berkshire teachers are paid less than Berkshire Hills teachers. And so with the merger proposal, we have baked into our numbers, bringing Southern Berkshire teachers up to to the level of Berkshire Hills teachers in salaries. Now, I would argue that's a really good thing. Yes, is it gonna cost us more? Yeah, it's gonna cost us more, but why should Southern Berkshire teachers be paid less across the board than Berkshire Hills teachers? So yes, there are differences, but maybe equalizing is a good thing across the board, right? So, there are reports that really break down, and we can send them to you.
And my
What is the reason for that discrepancy, right? Why is it for this? Where are they spending more money? And then you can look at those things and say, yeah, I sort of agree we should be spending more money in those areas or not.
And my colleague Colin Smith, who was also on the finance committee, just said part of that increase is the increase in teacher salaries. Oh, Peter, what are you two guys behind me? And I'll spit it out for them. Somebody gave me the info.
Bob Kilmer, Sheffield. I guess it's just a statement of fact. As I followed this for quite some time and gone through these numbers, I have a very low confidence level in these numbers. They project a 3.25 interest rate, which seems awfully low. They project a low building rate. They project a low transportation rate. These numbers, in my mind, do not equal today's costs. Not even close. So I have a very low confidence in these reports. If I believe these numbers, I might be more inclined to go along with the merger, but I have a very low confidence level in these numbers.
I'm sorry, we used really skilled, very conscientious outside.
And I do realize that, but we do have somebody that is more of an expert in transportation. Would you like to address
when you're
that?
done with the finance, my name's Marie Massini Bus Company, contract for Berkshire Hills currently. I spoke with Jake when this first thing started, gave him a 2-page synopsis of what I thought might happen. I have looked at your experts' work and I did respond to it. Went through every single route that they recommended, and out of 40, I think we could have done 4 or 5. Because we were going over bridges we couldn't go over. We were going on roads in Monterey that are closed. In West Stockbridge, taking a 71 passenger bus up Maple Hill, or Lenox Mountain Hill. I'm sorry, Monterey, I don't know all the names of your roads because my brother typically does your transportation. But go up this road and find a turnaround where you can't even get the bus up the road to find a turnaround. I'm so frustrated with the fact that an outside company that comes into this community, the community of 8, and says, we can go on this road, we can do this, we can do that, who has never traveled the roads. There is not a road in Berkshire Hills that I haven't been on. I've been doing this 36 years. Had New Marlboro and Monterey, I don't know how many years. And I'd love to see some of those roads up there with a 71 passenger bus. This report, and I don't speak to you, the board, I speak to you, the selectmen and the finance people. When you go to represent to your communities, you need to know that this is not saving you a nickel, especially in Southern Berkshire. This is not cutting your time frame down, okay? Then I read further that if you're in Egremont and you choose to go to New Marlboro Central at whatever time frame it is, you can still do that and we'll transport you. How in the world do you save money doing that? How in the world do you take somebody from Southfield and pick up 20 or 30 or 40 high school kids on the way to go to Berkshire Hills in under an hour and a half? no less, 45 minutes to a half hour. It's, you can look at the beautiful graphs and you can look at the routing software, which does not and has never worked in our types of communities. Okay, it doesn't work. You don't have to listen to me. I went over the routes, wrote down everything that was not going to work. Please, select boards and finance committees, when you talk to your residents, whether you're in support or not, I don't either support or not support it, but don't base it on the transportation report. It's absolutely a fallacy of what he's produced. Thank you.
Well, first of all, I just want to say that there's no representation in the transportation report that the transportation costs are going to go down with a merger. It doesn't say. It says that with a modest investment, some devotional number. What is it? 40-50 grand?
For three vans. For three vans.
Yeah. It's yeah. That we can do maximum time 1 hour and 45 minutes. That's what he says. Now, in terms of the consulting firm that was engaged to do this work, that's the consulting firm that Southern Berkshire funds for transportation. So it's not some outside firm that's never seen our towns before. They're using them currently to help them analyze transportation.
Can I add something, please? A number of years ago, Robert Miller, former contractor for Southern Berkshire Regional School District for transportation, along with Messini, we shared all the bus routes for Southern Berkshire for 30 years. Southern Berkshire Regional Collaborative came up a number of years ago, and it was funny that I saw the name Rich LeBray on your committee. That was also on that committee years ago. They came up with a software program and rerouted our routes. They presented it to us. We looked it over. This was about a month before school was supposed to start. We had the same experience that Maria's having right now. We looked over what they spit out, and we said, this is not feasible. And they said, oh, we understand there'll be a few tweaks you'll need to do. And we, go home and look at it again. We did. And we came back a week later and said, we're sorry, this is just not feasible. You can't do it the way this software spit out these routes. 2 weeks before school started, they came back and said, do whatever you have to do to get the kids. So we didn't change a thing. Now, if this software is worth the money that's been spent on it, why can't you get representatives from there to come down and look at our roads, look at the routes that they designed, and say, yeah, we were wrong, because that's what it is.
My whole point is not to shoot down the consultant or whatever, even though I don't agree. But my whole point is I don't want the community to think that, and there is several that think, oh, we're going to save money because it's only going to cost this much money to add a couple more vehicles. That's not true. It's not true. You can't say that now when we don't know what is going to be, who we're transporting in 26. We don't know where they are, what schools they're choosing to go to. But there is no way, no matter where they are in the district, that you are going to cut the time on buses for our kids. It is not going to happen. When we look at, if there's one company doing this whole district, and you have elementary kids that are going to go from North Sagamore or Alford, whether they're going to Under Mountain or whether they're going to New Marlboro or whether they're going to Berkshire Hills, you have to combine all these kids. You're covering more territory to pick up more kids. It's taking longer. There's no way to do it in a shorter amount of time. I just want to make sure that the board understand that when their constituents ask them that think long and hard. If there's a kid on Norfolk Road in Southfield who's in high school, and we have to pick up 30 high school kids through Southfield, Mill River, and out through Hartsville, how long do you think that kid's on the bus? Hour and 20? At least. And they live out there. I don't. So that's my piece.
Got any finance in the Marlboro. Now this building you're building is gonna be a completely new building from ground up, right?
As part of the process, the building committee has to evaluate three options, whether it's renovation, a renovation addition, or a new building. My guess is it'll be a new building, potentially repurposing some of it, but it's really premature for me to even say that, right? So as part of the process, we're looking for three options.
Okay, so the building, say it's gonna be new building, brand new building, it's gonna be separate on the grounds and Monument Mountain is now, right?
Yeah.
Okay, it's not gonna be a renovation of the old building. What's gonna happen to the old building once the new building's put up? What's Barrington gonna do with that? Gonna be another big vacant building?
Great Barrington, there's a dog like the school district owns that.
Or are they gonna tear it down?
I mean, yet to be determined, but presumably, again, it's almost 60 years old and it gets taken down. But that's
another cost that's gotta be absorbed.
That cost is built into the cost of the project.
Okay.
Hey, can you start sharing your screen so that maybe we can see the Zoom?
Yeah, we made it with the mouth. He was sharing, then we did with the mouth.
Could everyone quiet it down? I know people are getting tired, it's late, I appreciate that, but you have more questions, and I want everyone to hear the question and then we answer. So, Carl, if you're on, identify yourself, please.
Hello, can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay, Carl Stewart, Alford, member of the Southern Berkshire Regional School District School Committee and member of Alfred's Finance Committee. I've done a considerable amount of work over the last few weeks studying the numbers, and it's not particularly surprising, but it certainly is dismaying the amount of magical thinking that's going on among some of the participants here. And they tend to be people that I think, I'm not sure because no one has really announced, but you watch people long enough and you know, and you can make a fair guess as to what side they're on, if in fact we call them sides. I've studied US Census Bureau and other statistics for a 50-year period, 1971 to 2021. That's the last year for which there are complete statistics. The Massachusetts is Massachusetts in those 50 years has gained 20% population, the Commonwealth of Massachusetts as a whole. That compares to 60% for the country as a whole. So Massachusetts is lagging. Berkshire County in that 50-year period is one of 3 counties of the 14 in the Commonwealth that have lost population. They are Dukes County, Martha's Vineyard, and Nantucket, are Dukes County, Barnstable County, which is the Cape, and Berkshire County. In that 50-year period, where Massachusetts gained 20%, not a good performance overall when compared to the country as a whole, which is 60%. Dukes, Barnstable, and Berkshire County are the only 3 of the 14 counties that have lost population. Berkshire County has lost about 16% of its population in that 50-year period, compared to a gain of just over 20%. I think it's 21.2% for the Commonwealth as a whole. The fastest growing demographic, again, Dukes County, Barnstable, and Berkshire, is age 65 plus. It is up in that 50-year period nearly 100%. The fastest declining population, again, Dukes, Barnstable, Berkshire County. The fastest declining population, ages 5 to 19. I listened to this conversation about the effect of the pandemic. Oh, we're going to see a surge in population. Well, it just hasn't happened. And it's not going to happen for a number of reasons. But we don't have to ask why it's not going to happen. It's not happening. And we are fooling ourselves, or maybe we're trying to fool others, or both, if we think that a minor bump in a couple of years in the elementary school population is going to affect the overall decline of population in the southern Berkshire towns. It isn't. And I will give odds to anybody that it is highly unlikely that there will even be a southern Berkshire district 10 years from now. I probably won't be alive. I'm an old guy. I probably won't be alive in 10 years, but it seems very, very unlikely. A couple of more statistics. 20% of the high school students in the Commonwealth of Massachusetts, 20% go to schools, high schools that have an extensive or a reasonably complete voc tech program. If the high school loses, we shouldn't assume that Berkshire County is going to perform, that students are going to want to do what they do everywhere else in the Commonwealth. If 20% of our high school goes to a voc tech program, and there's already an imbalance of transfer in, transfer out between Berkshire Hills and Southern Berkshire, then we're going to lose 20% of the high school population, having nothing to do with the demographics. We're having nothing to do with breeding, with age. There aren't that many 65-year-old plus people who are having school-age children. It just doesn't work that way. It's not the biology. So if we lose 20% of the high school, how can you argue that there is going to be a viable high school population that can deliver, and in a high school district, to deliver a quality education? People say, well, not everybody wants to go to college. Absolutely true. That's a good thing. But I know businessmen, in particular, a high-end auto repair place that starts its mechanics at $50,000 a year in the Southern Berkshire Regional School District. And that company can't find people to work there. So, I mean, look at the numbers. I mean, you can engage in all the magical thinking you want, but the numbers don't lie. They're there, and there is no reason to believe. I mean, you can invent reasons why it'll happen, but it hasn't happened in the past 50 years. The Berkshire Regional Planning Commission, very highly qualified people, say it's not going to happen, and they've been right all the time. They've been right for 40 years. And so I think you've got to look at the numbers and look at that and say, what are we advocating for? If you truly believe that the whole purpose, that the major purpose of this exercise is not to save money, is not to positively affect the time that a school attender sits on a bus, but to improve the quality of education, to have greater opportunities in high school, language opportunities, vocational opportunities, all that. I think there's only one reasonable conclusion that you can make, and there's a lot of more numbers that I have, but it's either boring or challenging to some people. Yeah. So actually, that's it. I'm sorry if I've taken too much time, but that's what I.
Thank you.
Thank you.
All right. Any more finance committee, select board members before we open for public comments? Any finance? No. Okay. All right. All right. So I know it's late. I would like to be able to recognize those who are not finance committee or select board members, give them an opportunity to speak. So sorry,
limited to a minute or two. Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. Let's try and keep it to a minute to 2 minutes. Okay. Yes, sir.
No, I would just like to stand up because I'm a parent. I have 3 kids in university. And
identify yourself.
Kevin Fish, by choice in from Sandusfield, but I get the numbers up. And but no, I keep hearing quality education, and I know I've been to about 4 or 5 of these things already. The one thing that was not part of your mandate was determining what the education is like. But that as a parent is a concern to me. And the one thing I have to say about Southern Berkshire Regional School District is it's phenomenal. And the things that they're doing now, this partnership with Transcend, it's transcendeducation.org. I would encourage you all to look up because it's all about reinventing education, what it looks like, how to best prepare our kids for the future that they're in. Taking into consideration AI, the way you're learning, what's available, and meeting their needs. So I'm just encouraging you to take a look at that because it's an incredible partnership and they're doing incredible things there. And I'm sorry that some of the staff like Beth and Charles aren't here anymore. We're really lucky to have them as well as the other.
Hey, Patrick White from the Stockbridge Select Board. I think that tonight, so much of the conversation has revolved around current staff and current processes and the current decisions that people are making. Let me just make my point. Okay. All right. I went to Plain School in Stockbridge in 1967 as a kindergartner, where there were 350 students there. And this year we're gonna have Peter Wood, 108 students. And we're probably gonna be down to 50 to 75 in 10 years. You don't think that this population decline is going to stop in 2030? It isn't. They've done the studies at BRPC. They're talking about it going down further. In Stockbridge 20 years ago, a house cost $285,000 and somebody's median income was $45,000. Today, the median house is $700,000 and somebody makes $45,000 still. People who are buying these houses with cash are going to be hedging against climate, just the way that they were hedging against the pandemic. And they become largely out, our homes and our communities are becoming largely out of the ability for young people to buy in, and that is a trend that is not going to stop. And when you look at 2040 and 2050 and 2060, we better have a plan for how these schools are gonna operate. And it has nothing to do with how great our teachers are right now, or whether or not, like, you
It
know.
wasn't about teachers, it was about quality of education, which has not been addressed.
Okay.
And I don't know how that, well, small towns in rural America, or small towns,
Well,
they do.
look at our- Yes, ma'am.
Michelle Revere, 70 Bridget Street, Great Barrington. I came in here with a couple areas in question. I now have 9. And one of them being the transportation. By the way, I used to work with Southern Berkshire Regional School District. I now work for Lenox Public School. I have various areas of concern. Not going to go into them, but they include transportation. They include enrollment. There's a surge to create affordable housing and welcome families into our community. Well, if they're families, they have children, the children are going to go to the schools, ergo it's going to impact enrollment. Another thing to look at enrollment is the immigrant population coming into the area. Lenox has been impacted by that. So I see enrollment actually possibly going up. Also, at one point, somebody said the greater good, going to meeting after meeting after meeting, when I hear the greater good, a red flag goes up. When all else fails, say it's for the greater good and let's do it. My biggest concern is a special town meeting. We're here tonight with over 2.5 hours. And I have a concern for my town, Great Barrington, that other warrant articles on the special town meeting warrant will detract and convolute from this issue. As you can see, it's highly debatable. You're gonna vote, I'm giving 1 minute of time. That's not gonna happen on the annual town meeting, special town meeting. So I would highly recommend that this issue, which is historical, is controversial, be a standalone item if it can be on a special town meeting warrant. Because I've been up at Monument Mountain for hours for warrant articles. And I have to be honest with you, after a while, your brain goes to mush. And this is something where your brain shouldn't be mush, but this is a huge thing. Thank you.
I think, is he still here? Oh, there you go. Yeah, I mean, the whole reason for a special town meeting was, I hope that we would only have one warrant article. That's what I'm for special town meeting, but I understand that here at Great Barrington, there is the ability of citizens.
That's not what I'm not talking about citizen petitions, I'm talking about warrant articles, other warrant articles. But I was told that a meeting is, if anything, would only be housekeeping warrant articles, that's not going to be the case. And it will detract from this major issue.
We'll decide that September 18th, so it hasn't been decided.
Well, I go to a lot of meetings, with all due respect, and I've heard the planning board talk about it. I've heard other conversations, other boards.
Oh, we're gonna talk about it.
Okay. But after waiting 2.5 hours to speak at a special town meeting, then you're gonna see people walking out the door.
God, we're the same age, that'd be an handle of either.
Then we should do something about it.
Stephanie?
Joseph Carpenter, I live in Ashley Falls. Big transparency in work in the household with some regional school district. I worked there for 25 years and I'm currently principal. I have 4 kids, 2 graduated, 9 and 2 that are 10 now. And I just have 2 questions for you. Is there going to be a meeting to discuss the draft issue to discuss that in depth?
We been discussing the regional agreement in that at our, you mean a public forum meeting?
Yes, as a separate topic, but a public forum and just have that as sort of the meat of the meeting.
Open to that possibility. We haven't made any decisions about the specific topics of public forums, but if you think that would be helpful, we certainly could do that.
I've had people mention it.
Okay.
I also occasionally get some parents involved in me, and one of the big concerns with all of our, you guys have some statements about, like extracurriculars being more robust. And I think there's a concern in terms of things like athletics, where when you look at, the two schools, I'll just take soccer, for example, you know, both schools have healthy teams. And, you know, I was thinking last year where, you know, there were probably 35 kids for both teams in the JV game, and probably closer to 38 varsity teams. And some people are concerned when if you were to bring them all together, what happens to all the kids who get left out in terms of not being able to have that experience? And I would say the same probably stay true for theater, and depending on how you organize like a band, even chorus, you know, you might have some kids who get left out. And has that been addressed at all?
Probably Jake can speak to sports better than I, because I'm not a sports person, but I'm a music person, right? And one of my most treasured experiences in high school was to be able to play in an orchestra. Because I was never going to be able to play in an orchestra again. And the only opportunity that I ever had to play in an orchestra was in high school. And you know, that's the other side of the coin, Jeffrey, is that you need a certain critical mass, right? To see an orchestra, to have some of the other extracurricular opportunities that you can have in a school, still a small district of 1,600, that you can't have in a school that's 600. So yeah, there are trade-offs, definitely. But I think, and you know, I admit that I came to this study 4 years ago, and I'm not an expert in optimum district size, but the studies I have said that optimum district size is like 2,000 to 6,000. And you even combined are going to be under 2,000 capacity. Now, optimum high school size, it's not 160. I think you would agree with me.
Oh, no, I
you know,
understand that.
and so, yes, might there be some kids who get on varsity now that might be sitting more time on the bench with a bigger school and a more competitive team? Yes. But there are other opportunities that open up as a result of a larger school.
Yeah,
So,
I understand that. And I think the other side is just, right now you have these school districts that provide a whole lot of opportunities. I think we'd be remiss if we didn't acknowledge that some of those go away. And I'm not talking about the kid who isn't good enough to start for the team, but the kid who gets left out completely. Because as we know, when you put the sound, your soccer team can carry 45 or 50 kids, when in some cases we have them in playing.
yeah, I mean, you know, the idea here, and I get that some people disagree, and I'm not going to convince you, I'm not going to convince you. Most of you probably have already made up your minds, but the idea here, and we're all approaching this in good faith with the same goal, which is to do the very best we can for our kids, at levels that our towns can afford. And the idea here is to take the best from Southern Berkshire, which we hear a lot about, and I acknowledge it. I mean, I sent my daughter to Southern Berkshire. And take the best from Berkshire Hill, and combine them, not take everything away, combine them, and keep all that is good, and keep as many of those electives as we possibly can, so we can offer all of the kids more. That's the idea. That's where this recommendation is coming.
Yeah, can I just say one more thing? And not to disagree with you. I also should say I graduated from Mount Auburn in 1982. My two kids who graduated recently graduated with more kids in their senior class than I did. And that's not to say overall the population has gone down, but it should be noted that senior class wise, I graduated a long time ago. My kids have more kids in that class. Thank you.
Is there anything you want to talk about on sport? Jay?
Next baby. What?
It's almost not very long, right?
Yeah. Okay. Yeah, go ahead.
Another question?
Yeah. Yeah. Okay, I got more questions. Yeah.
There's a lot of questions, but they were.
Ken and one other, and then we're gonna wrap it up.
So my question is, you like about fiscal responsibility and you're saying that a district is gonna be a combined district eventually of 2,000 people, et cetera. Well, I know for a fact, Mount Everest High School was built for 1,200 students and 1,400, the high school. You know, it's 2,000. Yeah, it's 2,000. Even, but even if it can fit both middle schools, it can fit both high schools. They can fit all of those.
I was on the building committee, no. Yeah.
So there's other ways to be fiscally responsible. The second item I look at too is the 50% choice in students, because you tend to leave out, you'd like to say that it's all coming from our district, but Peter Dillon himself said, we have a contract with Richmond, we have a contract with Sandusville, Farmington River goes to them, so those are our 50% kids.
Just to respond to that, that's separate, so the tuition agreements are counted separately.
They're saying 50% children choice into non.
I think what she said.
I have numbers, and it's not 50% of them birth.
It's not even like debatable. We can just look at the report. I don't think so.
I sit on the committee, I see the numbers, we got it broken down. Can we have those numbers?
Yeah.
So you've got it. Fine. How about that? Fine.
About 2 weeks ago, for one.
I got it today, the first day is, I told you, wait, until I can get it.
Okay.
All right, all right. We're in 10 minutes to go.
Next.
Fine, go ahead. One. I have a lot of universities and students. I do, even though we come out on our side. First, when I checked with our town clerk, Bonnie Silvers from Sheffield, I'm on the planning board and the school committee as well. I am not representing the school committee. This is that is a real concern. When I spoke to the clerk of our town, she has never had more people coming into Sheffield. The registration numbers are incredible, people coming in. And she did a breakdown on 18 and under. We are having increasing numbers. So I can't speak for the other towns, but we know in Sheffield, the number is going up. The other thing, and I just want everyone to be aware of, since a lot of my background is in technical vocational education, student career programs. Recognize that though we do not have CBT, we have an incredible career pathways program. We have a major association, obviously, with the college, with Simon's Rock, with our students, the very first year earning over 200 credits. And the Transcend was highly competitive. We are one of 10 high schools throughout the United States that was selected. And the people who came and evaluated us, from the moment they walked in, they said, this is a different place. So I think we have to take all the into consideration, though at the same time, we have to have the reality of numbers. And I also have to say, the concern that I have had about, even though I served on the education committee, my colleague here also did, is I don't think we did the visioning that I thought was going to happen when I got on this committee. And I hope that, Lucy, we will have a larger forum for the discussion of the regional agreement. Because there are so many issues, and actually my quote for the Sheffield Times is, I think everybody should be getting together in small groups and forming areas. And it really, you need to look at it. Because it's, don't trust me for my vote on the planning board, and this is a 50-year at least decision. And my last is a question, I think for you, Jay, when the original numbers came out, a lot of the saving of money, the charts show that there would be 25 to 30 students in class. Now, if that's the basis, neither Mount Everest nor Monument have anywhere near that in terms of their classes. So if we're getting a lot of the savings because of these larger classes, and that's what was built in, that's a real problem because it doesn't, yes, we don't want classes of 3, but this would be a complete revolution in how we program our students. So I'm not gonna go into the culture issues or anything else, I've overused my minute, but we've got to read this carefully. We have to, because it makes such a difference for our future as communities. Thank you.
Speak to the, class size is baked into our savings of 1.2 to 1.3 billion.
Yeah, we did a range of class size analysis, so, let's say, for example, we looked at a total of all the Algebra 1 classes off of the total number of kids that would enroll. We ran a low number, 18, and a high number of 20. That created a range. We wanted to have a sense of, we started to organize and balance the classes. What does that look like? So, and I believe we have that pretty much spelled out in the report.
I don't believe we're modeling the 25.
No, we never modeled. Yeah. And then the other thing is, a lot of areas were avoided. I know, no, people are getting restless.
Yeah.
Special education.
Yeah, just quiet down, we're just gonna take one more question, then we're gonna wrap up. So, go ahead.
Mark Piquetti, Sheffield resident. I just wanted to clarify, Lucy, something you said earlier. I believe you said that there was no state money available for renovation. And then 10 minutes later, the gentleman back here, when asked a question about the building, said, well, I don't really know what they're gonna do. Maybe they'll renovate, maybe they'll build new. Two different. Renovate would mean there is state money available.
No, so maybe I wasn't clear enough, and I apologize if I wasn't. It took a very long time for Berkshire Hills to get back into the pipeline with the MSBA. And they're there. That's a gift. That's an opportunity. That's a remarkable opportunity that we can take advantage of if we choose to. If we don't build there and talk about.
Okay, you're not answering my question.
Wait.
Is it available or is it not?
If we build somebody else, somewhere else, we're not qualified. We're not in the MSBA pipeline. So we would have to go through that, what was it?
12 years.
12 years.
Yeah.
To get state money to build somewhere else. That was my point. Not that there's no money for renovation, but if we change locations, if we don't take out the opportunity that currently exists on that Great Barrington campus, we go to the back of the line with MSBA. That was my point.
Thank you. Lisa, we got one other thing. The MSBA used to do 150 projects a year when we were in it 12 years ago, and now they're doing 50 projects a year. So the odds each project's costing more, the odds of getting back in are a third of what they were 12 years ago.
But because Berkshire Hills is in line, they could renovate.
They could renovate, but I don't think that's gonna happen, but I had to follow their process and study the three possibilities.
Okay, I'm going to close up the meeting. Each of the boards that want to take a vote for the